Hello, and welcome to the Loving You interview series, conversations with wellbeing and holistic experts on self-love and self-care. And I'm your host, Rachel, and founder of Under the Dancing Tree School of Sacred Dance and Healing. And today I have with me Ben Calder. Ben Calder is the founder and director of the Centre of Integral Health. So welcome, Ben.
Hi, Rachel. Thanks for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be with you.
You're very welcome. And I was just saying to Ben how nice it is to have another man here to be talking about self-love and self-care. So as I've been starting with all the people I've been interviewing, I would really love for you to share about your journey and how you came to be doing what you're doing, really. And I found with most people that I've interviewed, actually everybody that I've interviewed, that they've come to do what they do because it has supported them actually on their journey of self-love and self-care, and it is their biggest and most contributing tool. So so if you could share a little bit about your journey, that'd be fantastic. Thank you.
I mean, it's a really interesting place to begin anyway, because being where I am now in my practice, I'm 17 years into professional practice. I'm nearly 30 years into looking at holistic health for my own use and in various ways. But to really understand why I do what I do, I have to go back. I have to go right back to that primary wound, to that place where the fracture first happens, because ultimately that's why I do what I do. And that is separation between my parents, age 2, when, and because again, we're looking at a man's perspective of self-care. I think my history is kind of relevant, but my mother was in a physically abusive relationship with my father, and she left him, and that begins the journey. That begins the, how does a man have a positive masculine role model? What is the nature of self-care? How do we feel in relationships? There's so many things that root back into that one little moment in my life that, for me, especially from a memory point of view, but even from a growing up point of view, didn't really have anywhere near the significance then that it does now. So for me, it was just life. One day your father's there, the next day he isn't. You're then doing life in a different way, but as a 2-year-old and growing up through, they don't kind of really understand why. So you just get on and deal with the situation you're in. And I had a very loving mother. I had somebody who was always very working her hardest, doing her best to care for us, raise us, look after us, help us to be autonomous, and did a fabulous job with me and my 2 elder brothers. And then when I got when I got into my teens, I started getting interested in the world from a different perspective. And there was at the time in my secondary school, there was a Christian youth group who used to self-righteously wander around with their guitars, playing songs and praising God and telling us we were all sinners and that we should be joining them. And some friends of mine and I, just to wind them up, started getting into paganism and talking about how they should be honoring the earth, and God is in the earth. And so we kind of did it in that way. But it got me into a little bit of trouble at school, and which my mum found quite hilarious, to be honest. And a little while later, when I'm in my teens, my mum starts taking me to psychic development classes with a friend of hers who lived just down the street from us. This friend also happened to run what for kind of 17 plus years was the Call Me New Age exhibition, which was a massive 3-day exhibition into New Age, spirituality, development, health. Back in the early 90s onwards, this was taking place. And we used to go and help set it up, be support staff during the events. And we would have loads of workshop doors, and we would take the tickets for them. And you had the choice of staying in the workshop to listen to it, to stop people from coming in and disturbing it, or sitting outside to stop people from disturbing it. So I was sat inside. So, from being in my kind of mid-teens onwards, I was listening to all of these great speakers talking about spirituality, holistic health, energetics, so much stuff I got to see and hear and listen to so long ago. And then went away to university, did the whole kind of university, making myself messy business. And then after that, I recognized that actually there were health issues that had been around for me for some time, wasn't really dealing with them very well. So I started looking for a better way of doing that, and happened at one of these event to be introduced to a lady called Sue Lilly, who's been a mentor and a teacher to me for many years. And she introduced me to kinesiology, under a talk called Hacking Your Body's Computer, finding ways to actually jump in and speak to the parts of us that didn't represent here, which is most of us, and how we can use kinesiology for supporting the body. And I spoke to Sue after the talk and said, well, I've got these problems going on, do you think you can help me? And she just said, sit down and let's find out. Because as a kinesiologist, we just never know. We never know what we're going to find, how we're going to do it. So I started, this was in 1999, and I met Sue for that and started seeing a kinesiologist. By the end of 2000, early 2001, I was already going into training for kinesiology because I didn't like my job all that much and it was having such amazing results with me. I thought, great, let's start looking at it. At this time, I start getting introduced to some other work as well. So this is the first time I come across Bowen technique as well. And I moved through a lot of energetics at this point. So I do a lot of work with color, with sound, homeopathy, vibrational essences. I've worked with geopathic stress. There's so many different bits that over the years have become what I class as part of the integral model of health that I work with, which is the fact that there are multi-dimensions to look at. And rather than thinking it's all about the body, or it's all about the mind, or it's all about something else, each one of those things is whole within itself, but is also part of a greater whole. So we can't ever separate our mind from our body, from our culture and relationships from our environment. So they're all integrated all the time, whether we believe it or not. And so from a health point of view, I now just explore those relationships and find out where things are working, where things are not working, how the body can resolve things for itself. And it's amazing how many different aspects and layers there are with the people that I see, because sometimes it can be quite complex or long-standing stuff. So, and I just keep on going, I keep on learning. I practice and I teach the Life Force Qigong work that my brother founded. And, I work with things like my rapid scar release technique with people. I do all sorts of work with people. It's just become, not complex, but just many avenues, many aspects, and it's a beautiful job.
Fabulous. Thank you for sharing. I love when you said about, the emotions and the spirit and the body being so interlinked. And I mean, I'm sure lots of people can relate to this, and it's certainly happened to me where I've gone to the doctor, of like a pain, and they're like, well, there's nothing physical there, it doesn't exist, and then they just dismiss it, and then you're left and you're like, yeah, but I've got this debilitating pain, and there must be something wrong because and like and there's always so many different layers, and that's when I think these are all, we call them alternative, but I suppose they should be not alternative, but working with doctors, just to fully see all of these different aspects and see them as interrelated, not as separate. And every time we have a physical pain, and this has come up a lot in these interviews, is about listening to the body, and what does the body have to say? Often there is an emotional and a spiritual something behind every physical pain, and there's always, I guarantee there's always some kind of lesson there.
Sure. Yeah. One of the things that people tend to forget is that ever since Descartes had permission from the Pope to dissect bodies, there was a particular condition in that the Pope gave to him, was that you're allowed to examine the bodies, but you can't examine the mind, because the mind is the realm of the church and we're in control of that, so you don't get to mess with it. And that was Descartes' deal. So at that point, medicine actually had a very powerful schism. It separated up, because to be able to understand the body better, they had to leave the mind alone. And it's not until the beginnings of the 20th century, especially with Freud, that we start to see this awakening that the mind has another type of validity. But in integral theory, we see the body and the mind as the objective and subjective sides of the same coin. So the mind cannot contract around the idea of anything without the body also responding. And the body can't be affected by a thing without the mind creating a response as well, because they're never separate. They're just two sides of the same thing. One has a location in time and space. We can
Mm-hmm.
point to it, we know where it is. The other one doesn't. I can point to your brain, but I've got no idea where your mind is.
Well, and there's lots of theories as well, isn't there, about where the mind and the soul and the heart actually are within the body. So they say don't dissect the mind, it's kind of, well, leave the body alone then, really. Okay. So I'm really interested as well. You spoke about your early childhood and kind of the impact of roles there. And I know that you do a lot of work with shadow self, and a lot of people will know their shadow self as actually their inner child. And there's such a huge impact that we now know, from work in psychology, etc., about how the first 7 years of our life really create our personality and everything that goes along with that, our spiritual path and everything. So I'd really love you to talk more into that, please.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think one of the really important classifications about the shadow to understand is that it is about that aspect of ourselves of which we are unconscious. So to kind of describe, say, our inner child, that aspect of our inner child that we're aware of and we can connect to is not shadow, because we're aware of it and we can connect to it. It's only the part that we are unconscious of that is the shadow. And that's where the trip ups take place, because it's the part of us that acts covertly. It's the part of us that is hidden. It's the part of us that we ignore. It's the part of us that we deny and pretend doesn't exist. So, for example, if we take some of the issues around my relationship to a father figure, because that's all it really is. As a man, I know my father now, and we have a relationship and we have communication, and I understand him as he is as a man now. But my projection of father is a different thing, because that's not based around a man, that's based around an ideal, an archetype, a concept. Just as mother, brother, sister, daughter, son, they're all archetypes that have explicit and implicit roles and behaviors, and we rarely look at any of this stuff. So my Zen teacher Genpo Roshi, he kind of talks about this dissection of the self so that we can understand the self. And some of the parts of the self are a little bit like children in the family. Some are preferred and some are not. And in fact, some are so kind of unloved that they're pushed down in the basement, and they're not often given very nice names. They're locked away and ignored. But that doesn't mean that they don't have a purpose, a right to exist, and something that they can contribute into our lives. So as we do the shadow work, what we're doing is we're exploring those reactions that we have to the world around us, because there's always a denial in the self. I am not that, but I see it around me. So one of my themes through my life is looking for father figures and looking for characters who I feel assured by, but also it's important for me that they're benevolent in nature, that they are passive, that they are gentle, that their guidance is clear, but they're not forceful, because those are parts of the masculine that I've rejected in the past. So having the strength, having that certainty, that power, are things that have been very difficult for me as a man to then be able to connect to, because they also associate into my fear of becoming a dominator. Because if I'm a dominant person, then again, the child's story is that I will become violent. And not only that, but it's likely to cause a separation or an ending within a relationship. So by avoiding that within myself, and when I was younger, I was a very passive character. I was an antagonist. I was somebody that was pedantic. I was somebody that would pick holes, and and again, that's still that kind of shadow part of me, is that part that's passive aggressive. So even being able to acknowledge that I fear being aggressive, and as a result I become passive aggressive, is a significant shift in my own consciousness, so that then I can start to learn to be assertive, and I can be strong, and I can dominate when appropriate, but know how to be sensitive, how to feel, how to sit back, and it's an evolving process. And absolutely right that kind of the majority of our nervous system is laid in by kind of age 6, 7. A lot of it is done by age 2. A lot of our mapping about how we will go into our early relationships, the first stages of our anima-animus complex, all set in place by age 2. But with shadow, we can actually evolve new shadow elements at any stage of our development. So even within the practices that you and I both know and learn, there'll be bits of that we've rejected and refused, and there'll be bits of it that we've included. And the question about why we've rejected some of the bits that we reject is a good question, because sometimes they're completely new structures, they're completely new ideas and concepts. Like when we move from rational thinking into pluralistic thinking, just going from logic into feeling. Sometimes there are bits of logic that will say, well, if I'm in my feeling self, I can't use logic, because my feeling self isn't logical, except the bit of it that is. So sometimes we can be in denial of certain parts of ourselves because they don't fit with the thing that we're trying to achieve. And that can be the creation of new shadow elements within us as well. And they can also be positive things. So they're about a refusal to accept in the self and seeing out in the environment, out in the other. So if I deny, let's say, my creativity, I might be kind of just like, so-and-so so creative. I love how creative they are. They're just amazing. I'm just in love with the work that they do. But me, I couldn't do that. So that is shadow. It creates this response in me, this beautiful response. Somebody can be so good at a thing, but I can't be that. So I can deny my goodness as well as my darkness within shadow. It's not just one thing. And becoming aware of that, noticing it in action, is something that I work with a lot with people, and it's a real passion for me, because it transforms how much energy we have available in our lives, just because the stuff that we've been keeping in the shed is now freed up. We can kind of think about shadow like we're paying rent on a lockup. And so it's still costing us energy every day, every minute, but we can't access any of the stuff that's in the lockup. So doing the shadow work allows us to take some of that stuff out of the lockup, which reduces the rent and gives us access to the goodie that was hiding away.
Yeah. And I think there's don't want to say the word responsibility, but with not having maybe I don't know how to put it into words, but male role models that maybe would lessen that shadow self, there's almost that responsibility to not continue that into the future, so, and as I was discussing to you before we started about there not being many men that talk about self-love and self-care, and to be more open about this work, and to be really talking about it, and to be walking our walk and talking our, walking our talk, that's the one. Yeah, and to be doing this work, as men and women. And I don't know whether you have more men that come to you, or as a man that come to do this work. Are there men that do you find are really interested in doing this work? Do you know?
I think actually I'm the exception rather than the rule as well. So characters like myself, like Rob, and so on, we're the people that have had the courage to do that, and have had the circumstances to be able to make that transition. I think that if we talked about a split, generally I'd say I've got an 80-20 split, 70-30 split, which is dominant to females over males. Males tend to come for the much more pragmatic work as well. Generally, I've got a pain and it needs fixing. Something ain't right with my diet. I've got an allergy. It tends to be the more physical stuff rather than any of the more subtle or the emotional stuff. But I think that one of the things that isn't really recognized, and if you ever want to kind of blast your ideas of how men behave in society and why and where that comes from, there's an amazing book. The reprint was in 2015 by an author called Warren Farrell, and the book is called The Myth of Male Power. And once you've read that book, you'll realize that part of how you look at males and masculinity is a very skewed view that has not acknowledged many of the things that happen. You know, for example, we don't take into account, we often kind of consider males perhaps to be career orientated and focused only on this kind of this this dominator space that they seem to be portrayed in quite often. You know, we could take a lot of modern films and show men somehow in kind of what I would consider as elite positions. You know, they're directors, they're at the very top of their game. And what it ignores is the 95% of men who are in industries like mining, building, roads, fisheries. You know, they're farming, they're doing all of the labor, and it's hard work. And to be a man in that kind of situation, I mean, populations across the world, you've got to be tough, because if you're not tough, then it is going to kill you, or the situation or the environment is going to kill you. And I don't think we really realize how hard so many of our industries still are, because they're hidden from us. You know, Russell Brand, not that long ago, I heard him talking about how, you know, in our modern world, there is CCTV everywhere, except in the places where we produce our food and in the places that we dispose of our waste. So we don't know these ends of our cycle. And you know, the top 25 most dangerous jobs in the world in terms of mortality rates are all done by men. You know, and that's not because women can't do them. You know, it's just that generally the requirement to do them is something that only this kind of 200,000-year-old hunter-gatherer, protector, provider role that men have been kind of taking for a long time. They're the only people that are willing to do that kind of work, you know, because of how hard and dangerous it is. And so men, to be able to deal with those spaces, have to be psychologically very different to women. And that makes it difficult for interrelationship between the two sexes as well. There's no doubt about that, because our communication models then struggle. So being able to actually, you know, and I do this with my partner all the time. When she says something, I say, well, what do you mean by that? Do you mean this? Because that's what I'm hearing, you know. And sometimes she's like, yeah, that's what I mean. And other times she's like, no, that's not what I meant. So for me, it's really important just to clarify some of those automatic givens we think we understand, and just to be clear about our communication. And you know, I fully appreciate and respect that the feminine, that women have an incredibly difficult time in this world as well. And it's not that, you know, one is more difficult than the other. They're difficult for different reasons. And really, you know, what for me is a true holism is the fact that we acknowledge and recognize each other's struggles, and we support each other to resolve them. It's not one or the other. You know, it's not one being put ahead of anybody else, but recognizing that we've got different issues for different reasons, and we need different types of support to get there. And it's difficult for men, really difficult. They don't like to talk. They feel vulnerable. They think there's weakness in there because they've spent every Marvel movie and every video game and every male-orientated book being told that, you know, what they're going to do is they're going to man up. They're going to make this transition from being juvenile into man by becoming something super. And that's usually a sacrifice to the world at the risk of your own life. And if you survive it, you'll get a reward. And most of the time, that's the respect of the world for saving it and a woman. So it's a mad old messed up space that we get put into, and to unpick all of that and be able to look at it from a more neutral perspective, where again we can be kind to ourselves and others, where we can contribute into the world so that us and everyone is benefiting from it. It's a very difficult thing in the world we have right now.
Yeah. So do you think that there's any support and change that man needs, if anything? Does there need to be a change, or is everything okay as it is?
So as a female, if I can ask, do you feel that there are some detrimental effects of patriarchy towards you?
Definitely.
Okay, perfect. So we don't need to identify what those are or why, but the fact is that there are some unhealthy aspects of masculinity. So of course we need help with those. And I'll be the first to hold my hand up and go, I have unhealthy aspects of masculinity. Because as somebody that is prepared to own my shadow and work with it, that's the first thing I have to do. I have to say, look, some of the stuff I do, and have done in the past has been messed up and it's not healthy. But what do I need to do to change that? What do I need to acknowledge in myself? What support do I need, and what changes do I need to make? And those are variable for all of us. And I think one of the hardest things to accept for the majority of people is that feminism also has some significantly unhealthy aspects. And the feminine also has some significantly unhealthy aspects. And if those are in the shadow, then they also will not help men change. So, we have to wake up to some of the stuff that's happening on both sides. Because I hate to say it, but you and I have both identified that the majority of our nervous system and our makeup is set by kind of ages 2 to 7. And the most time that we're likely to spend with any one individual in that period of time is with our mothers. So that means that a lot of our early imprinting as men is also coming from our mothers, from whatever history and experiences they've had, which, again, none of that is justification. It's just awareness. So as a race to wake up to where we're being healthy and unhealthy, and supporting each other to transform, supporting the differences that we have as well, because it's a clinical fact, it's a genetic fact that as a group of males, we're more likely to have better long-range vision, because we spent 100,000 years sitting on the side of hills watching game in silence, trying to work out how big it was and how fast it moved so that we could catch it for your dinner. And so we ended up using about a third of the language techniques that females did. So our ability to express was heavily reduced, because if we were noisy, we were likely to scare off dinner. Whereas for the females who were predominantly in the gathering phase, working in groups, creating noise to keep predators away, you develop 3 times as much language as men, which is why the feminine is generally better at communication, especially subtle communication, because that's inherently within your space. So we have these differences that are there, and it's not that they are in any way marginalizing the other gender. We're just different. It's like cats and dogs. They're both 4-legged furry creatures, but they have variabilities to them. And if we try and make everybody live along the same lines as everything with 4 legs and fur, then again, we're going to have difficulties. So being able to recognize where some of the difficulties are and helping each other change those is critical in health moving forward for both men, women, society as a whole.
Yeah. And it's really interesting that you said about kind of, I think, kind of men, like communication is one of their biggest learning curves. And actually, as a woman, I know, and I'm sure many women will agree with this, that for us, we kind of like over communicate, but inside here. So we're constantly like talking. And I remember watching this really interesting video by this psychologist, and he was talking about how women's brains are like lots and lots of wires that are constantly shooting out all over the place everywhere, and that men are like lots of boxes, and that they can just be in one box at a time, and they actually have an empty box that they can be in, and there's nothing. And I was like, whoa, how is that even possible? I'm just an empty box. I would love an empty box. So we're, as women, all aiming for this empty box.
It's actually the biggest desire of the masculine is freedom from burden. So that's where our emptiness is. And for the feminine, it's fullness in love. We want to feel that fullness. In a similar way, Martin Uchik, who is the developer of the integral relationships model that I work with, we're just in the process of doing the group facilitator training for the first time worldwide. So for the first time ever, people other than Martin Uchik are going to be leading integral relationship workshops, including me. And in his book, he's got a beautiful image of a device. And on the top part of the device is like loads of switches, dials, little things that you can twiddle. And on the bottom of the device is an on-off switch. And the top half of the device is labeled, women's thinking, and the bottom half of the device is men's thinking. And to a degree, there is that, but also that's a generalization that misses on the nuance of how we do things. you know, and the emptiness for women is not the same as it is for men. You know, it's a void that doesn't feel as comfortable, you know, whereas to actually be fullness in communion, you know, there's a difference in that, which is your peaceful space that's similar to our emptiness. You know, a lot of the spiritual practices that we follow that are ascending practices, they're taking us up to this emptiness, all developed by men. You know, whereas a lot of you think about more dance-based practices, ecstatic dance and fullness, that kind of space is more kind of inclined towards feminine spirituality in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, with the work that I do with women, I find that for most women, it's actually the biggest work we have to do is to come back into our bodies, because we've got so much around shame and disconnection and the wrongness of us that majority of our work, if we look at the chakras, is root, security and safety, and sacral, you know, around our belonging and our rightness. Yeah, and that's the biggest work.
And the body being this kind of, again, this juicy place that we can enjoy life. You know, we're a feeling creature and the world is magnificent around us and we can connect to that. But like you say, throughout history, it's held so much shame and held so much kind of charge into it. And again, especially because of the way men are taught to view women, you know, the majority view, we're taught to look at you from the visual point of view rather than a kinesthetic point of view. And, you know, men are very visually stimulated, so they're affected by everything that they see around us. We don't realize how much men are being sexualized, how much, even as youngsters, as boys, as teenagers, how much our thinking is being pushed to look at women in a particular way before we're even conscious. And unless we have the role models, unless we have the people that say to us, okay, it's all right to acknowledge beauty, but there's a healthy way about it and there's an unhealthy way. You know, we value it in the same way that we value goodness, truth, and function. So, you know, it's an equal standing with other things. You know, it's not one and the same. You know, and it's interesting in that way that, you know, we often look at this value sphere based on looks, but men also have a double take on this, because not only does a man generally need to look good, but he also needs to be a man of means. With a subtle communication behind it. We've got two layers. We've got to have that man of means as well, because I can be handsome, but if I don't have a career or money or stability or the ability to protect and provide, which at a subtle level is still sitting there for all of you princesses in your Cinderella dreams, you know, then you know it's just not going to happen. You know?
It's like Jane Austen.
Oh,
Every man of great fortune must be in want of a wife. Sorry if I've misquoted her.
but couldn't have put it better. That's absolutely the case. And this is why sometimes ugly men who've got money and power and position, you know, we don't understand why they have a pretty wife. You know, we make this judgment about, well, why would she want to be with him? You know,
Well, yeah, I think
why he wants to be with her. You know,
for women, I know that's about security.
for sure, yeah.
It's just that security, just knowing there's kind of almost a certainty there, and that's what the woman is craving.
Yeah, sure. And with there being nothing wrong with that. You know, that's the thing. There is nothing wrong with wanting to feel safe and secure and supported and looked after. You know, but the other thing is we want it too. You know, and I think this is sometimes the bit that isn't recognized. And you see, for a man to be held in the arms of the feminine, to be received, and you are the only gender that can receive us in the way that you can. You are the place that we all come from. You are the place that we revere. And you are the only place that we can be received in that love and fullness. A lot of people don't realize, but the term hero actually comes from the phrase to, as in for, Hera. And this is Hera as the Greek goddess. And it was the expectation that you will die in the service of the goddess. You know, so the hero is they who is willing to die in dedication and service of the goddess. So, you know, we're going back thousands of years of this belief. And our win is that the feminine will receive us, because you're the only gender that can do that. You know, the masculine is the projection, the feminine is the reception. This is, again, you can look at a lot of the traditional kind of images of things like the cup and the dagger. So it's, again, it's recognizing those innate gender aspects and the value that they have in us. But again, they've got healthy and unhealthy aspects. So finding the health of that is the challenge.
So for the women that are watching this, and I imagine it will be majority women, what would you say is the most contributing, the biggest thing that we could do as women to support the self-love and the self-care of men?
I think ultimately it's about kindness. It's we all understand the idea, or I would hope that we all understand the idea that we never actually know what's going on inside somebody else's head, and why they behave the way they do, why they choose the things we do. And in a purely factual point of view, it would take thousands and thousands of occasions to really understand somebody, to really understand anybody, and you'd have to see them in such a range of situations. There are situations that after years have appeared, and my partner's said to me, "Wow, I didn't expect to see you behave like that." It's kind of like, we've never seen that situation together. And it's interesting for me to see me behave like that in that situation that I haven't seen for years, and then see a reflection of it. So there's a learning in there. But just having that kindness and that consideration of, I acknowledge that this is difficult for you. I can see that you're struggling with this. How can I be of support? So rather than judgment, rather than conclusion, rather than condemnation, rather than punishment, it's about having the courage to be open. And it's amazing how much we punish each other with withdrawal of love. How much, and again, if we put it at a purely transactional level, for a man not to be able to have any intimacy with his partner unless he has carried out a transaction. So when you've done this, then you can have this. When you behave like this, then you can do that. And I can understand how, from a control point of view, that's necessary, but that also is very challenging, because then we have to move into this pleaser role. What do I have to do to get some love? What do I have to do to feel appreciated, valued, accepted by you, the person who I've been taught to value above all others, because that's what our culture did. And how can I find that self-love within myself, that respect within myself? How can you encourage me to be kind to me, be considerate to me, just as I want to do the same to you? These are not necessarily gender-specific suggestions. I think just humanist suggestions, that to get the most out of each other, to support each other in times of difficulty, we've got to be willing to listen. We've got to be willing to allow, so that's that person's space, whatever it is. I don't have the right to make them change, and I don't have the right to make them comply with anything, but I can talk about my needs, I can talk about my difficulties, and having that space where that's really allowed, without going into what was the term we were looking at the other day? Interpretations. So for instance, telling somebody you feel rejected isn't about how you feel. That's an interpretation about intent by the other person. So what's the feeling? The feeling might be sadness, loss, emptiness, and really being able to understand what the feelings are, and having a space for those where it's okay to feel. I think probably the hardest one for any relationship to work with is anger, because anger is always seen as aggression, rather than actually it's okay to be angry. It's okay for that much passion to come through for a subject. It's about how I present it. So if I'm angry and it's all finger wagging, you, that's not healthy, because it's not taking responsibility. It might be that you stimulated my anger. It might be something that you did without realizing, unconsciously or not, stimulated my anger. But it's still my response. So I've got to aim the response. I am angry. I have recognized that I've been triggered by this thing, responding to this thing. And that's where I am. So now what do I need? Okay, well, I need some acknowledgement that that was a difficult thing for me. You know, okay, now what do you need? Well, I need some support with that. Okay, what kind of support do you need? So it's just being willing to have these open conversations, which again, non-violent communication would be the first place I would suggest people check into on that. You know, straightforward ways of learning to own your experiences, communicate them cleanly, and ask for what it is you actually need. You know, and recognizing that difference between need and neediness within there as well.
Okay, yeah, thank you for sharing that. I know as women that, you know, we really do want to support men, you know, and as I was saying to Rob, you know, there's so many opportunities, I think, for women now to actually come together in community and discuss self-love and self-care, but there isn't the same opportunities for men. I don't feel there is, but I don't know if you know better than me than that, but
I mean,
and
it's
if there's a
much.
way that we can support, you know, within relationship with our fathers and our brothers and our partners and our children, then we want to do that. We really do. We just don't know how.
We love women, you know. For me, the feminine is amazing, beautiful, such a contribution into life, and you know, I want to have healthy relationships with the feminine on all levels. So you know, I need to have support within that. And I mean, there's a beautiful film. Again, if you want to understand some of these issues that the men are going through, there's a film called The Red Pill. And it was created by, at the time when she started it, a feminist filmmaker called Cassie J. And Cassie J had been an ex-Hollywood actress, you know, and as a kind of an attractive blonde young lady, she'd suffered in Hollywood as a lot of actresses struggle within that space. And they'd gone into producing and directing films to look at some of the issues around that. And when she made The Red Pill, it was to look at the men's right activism and some of the nature within that. And by the end of the movie, one of her final statements at the end of the film, and it's nearly 2.5 hours, is that she will no longer class herself as a feminist because of what she's witnessed and seen about how that harms men. And she wants to look for a more wholesome world. And part of what they picked up at in that is there's something like over 250 shelters in the US for women in domestic abuse, but there's only one for men. You know, so there's a big difference. We know that the women's circles, the red tents and so on, have been increasingly popular over the last kind of 10, 15 years. But getting men together in men's circles is slower and more challenging. You know, I ran a men's circle myself for 2.5 years, and it was just very difficult to convince men to come. You know, we had some guys that knew what they were doing and they were there all the time, you know, and that was great. And recently, we've up until the kind of lockdown period started, we'd started another new group at the beginning of this year, and that was starting to just grow nicely. But unfortunately, for the time being, that's not. But it's really important that we're supporting each other, and this is not about men, you know, kind of blaming women and being anti-women, and it's not about women blaming men and being anti-men. It's about recognizing how we've had this tangled interaction for so long, and how now, as we have these more world-centric perspectives, can we look at those from a healthy point of view, identify the things that are genuinely unhealthy for both sides, and start to make positive changes for those.
Okay, yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think, yeah, there's a lot of work that we need to do together, definitely. I remember the Dalai Lama saying that, actually said it was really easy for him to be a monk, and actually he admires, you know, people in relationships, because actually that's the most difficult job there is. I remember when he said that, I was like, wow, okay, yeah. And they talk about reaching, you know, nirvana in you know, it is as a single male monk, but actually he was saying that in relationship the work there goes so much deeper, you know, and that you'd have to be in like 1,000 relationships before you get to that point where you you're like, okay, I kind of got it now.
Sure, and I've heard it beautifully said before that if we take the old adage that any fool can meditate in a silent room. So I've heard a lot of people who are single say that they've sorted out all the problems that they had in relationships, but they're single, and it's kind of like until you're in a relationship and it's pushing you. You can't work those bits out because they're not fired up, they're not being connected to. And it is a really challenging work, which is why I'm so grateful for Martin Uchik and the integral relationship work. It just helps you understand why they're so complex and so challenging, and how, as we recognize those different aspects, it and for me, it always created a greater empathy towards everybody else, not just the other sex for me, but everybody else, because I could see that everybody was going through challenging relationships and challenging situations, and some of that was so messed up and created lifelong pathology that was so difficult to change.
So in your work, are you hoping to kind of support people more within relationship? Is that the aim of the training?
Absolutely. So, I mean, it's a big training. The integral relationships itself for participants is 26 parts. It's 26 weeks of work. And we allow people to dip in and out of that. But yeah, because our health in the world in general, relationships is one of those fundamental quadrants that I was talking about: body, mind, culture, and environment. Culture is our relationship. So being able to support people with that, help them to do healthier for themselves and each other, better communication about their needs and desires, it's important work. And I've done a lot of work with relationships over the last 17 years, and I'm just taking it into a kind of a deeper phase with the IR work.
And what would you say to men? What would your message be to the men, calling them into this work? Why do you think it's important for men to be doing this work?
Because I feel their pain. Men, if any of you do listen, or any of the ladies listening who already feel the pain of men, it's so obvious. It's so obvious that you're struggling. It's so obvious that you're confused and this world is challenging. And some of the things that feel good, you're told are bad. And some of the things that feel bad, you're told are good. So realize that there are men that are already passing through that pain and getting to a space on the other side where we feel healthier for it, where we can feel our hearts at a level that is enjoyable, and that connection to others, to the feminine, to other men, to everybody around us becomes so much easier when we do this work. And it's interesting, Ken Wilber kind of describes this. He says, as you go through this progression, you'll feel it more, but it will bother you less. So we change this awareness, that we're much more aware of it. And even when I'm kind of teaching shadow or doing something like that on a Zoom, I can see the impact of my words on people. I can see those shifts in their energy as to whether or not what we're doing is actually creating an opening, and is it helping, is it supporting, or is it creating a heaviness, contraction, is it locking more stuff in? So we learn to feel more so that we can be more of a contribution to each other. So that even if it's the person down at the shop who I'm getting my groceries from, is my interaction with that person opening them to a better experience of the divine on that day? And I want to do that for everybody where I can.
Yeah, thank you for that. No, thank you. Yeah, I say a lot to a lot of my students, that you have to feel it to heal it. And I can't say that enough. Like, so many people want to escape, and sometimes people will run away rather than feeling it, but it will chase you or it will just pop up in front of you, and actually feeling it and being in it and going through that process, there is another side of that. And that other side is so much better than being chased again and again and again.
Sure. But it is a path as well. And I think that it's like what's been seen cannot be unseen. So there is something about ignorance and denial that also have a value. You know, we can bury ourselves in alcohol or drugs or any other addictive practice that we like, but we're not going to feel right. Okay? Whereas what we're looking for is a lightness and an openness. And if you really want to find that freedom, you've got to go in. You know, and David Simon, who is a long-term collaborator and supporter with Deepak Chopra, wrote a book many years ago saying the only way out is in. And really that is it. The concept of freedom or not is all here.
Ooh, so much good stuff. I feel like we could talk for hours and hours. Wonderful. Okay, so I am gonna draw us to a close, just because I said we'll be here for hours otherwise, as enjoyable as that would be. So I'm going to finish with a question that I've asked everybody else, so you can't escape from this question, though it's not too scary. I've asked everybody to share the one thing for them that is like the biggest and most favourite and enjoyable tool in their self-care toolkit. So what do you do every day, or just whenever you felt drawn, what gives you the most joy in your self-care?
Hands down, it's always the Life Force Qigong. It's because as a movement practice, I can regulate my body, my mind, my breath, my emotions, my organs. I know with that practice how to deal with every single structure and tissue in my body. And at the same time, I can generate energy. At the same time, I can release repetitive or inhibiting thoughts through my mind just through the one practice. So if there was, you know, if I got to take one thing to a desert island with me, it would be Life Force Qigong, you know, because that will be the thing that will help me sustain and support me. And you know, some of the people listening to this will know about the story of my brother a couple of months back when he was stranded in the Brazilian jungle because of the corona situation, and it was a sketchy situation for him. Like, we were really quite concerned, and he said the only thing that stopped him going mad out there was his Life Force Qigong. So again, you know, if you want something that's going to regulate you, and this is it with this mad weather that we've got, this emotional weather of corona, you feel all this stuff coming up in the body and you don't know what to do with it. I do a Qigong practice and it's dissipated again, you know, so it just regulates me and helps me stay healthy all the way. If there was one thing you can do and nothing else, that would be my choice.
Yes. And can we find out more about that on your website? Do you do it online at the moment?
Yeah, so there's online classes, and again, if you just go through to my website that you see at the back there, bencalder.co.uk, or through to integralhealthshrewsbury.com and look on the events there, our bookworm system, we've got classes 5 days a week, so you can do Life Force Qigong 5 days a week, and we've also got yoga and other mental health support stuff going on as well. And if you're in the kind of the Chester, Harden or Shrewsbury area, you can also do one-to-ones in the park with me as well, so I can come and do appropriately social distanced individuals and small groups to do Life Force Qigong there. And when I teach my classes, a lot of it I teach out in the open air down at the Glaston playing fields here in Harden, and if people just want to come and join in, they can do that free of charge as well.
Okay, fabulous. And I will also put the link for Ben's website down below in the comments as well. And then if you have any things you want to ask, then do feel free to ask away, and we'll send any messages and we'll try to answer anything as well that we can. Thank you so much, Ben, for being interviewed today. It's been really lovely talking, and thank you so much for all that you're doing in the world and the contribution that you are. I'm really grateful for all that you've been through and all that you're delivering as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rachel. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm so glad to have been able to speak and share with you. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And we'll see you in the next interview. Take care.